Vampires, they are back, but we're set to take the biggest bite out of them that has ever been bitten over here at Top 5 Scary Videos. We're turning the coffins and we're opening the curtains. See what I did there? Of course you did, because tooth and tongue aside, it's clear to see that the vast majority of us are vampirical fanatics, and what better way to scratch that particular itch than to dive into the very rich and intricate lore that has been documented thus far in horror history. Also, welcome to a brand new series where we're going to be doing things a little bit differently and attempt to take a longer form look at some of the most influential and important lore in literature, cinema and video games. Welcome to the Lore Explored. Hello horror fans, what's going on, and once again welcome back to the Scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. As per usual, I'll be your horror host Jack Finch as we begin our brand new series by curiously taking a look at vampires in literature. Roll the clip. I mean, it might be a new series, but we're still going to roll the clip.
The knife is old and could be dirty. It could give you blood poisoning. Please, let me do it.
The oldest remedy, and for the curious amongst you, our first flag post in the rich lore of vampire fiction is 1979's Nosferatu the Vampire, directed by the legendary filmmaker Werner Herzog, which depicts Klaus Kinski being the creepiest Count Dracula ever depicted on screen, building upon the critical surprise success of F.W. Murnau's 1922 German adaptation Nosferatu. Obviously, we can't begin this list without giving a direct nod to these bloodthirsty stalkers of the silver screen, but here, for this list, we're diving into the lore behind vampires in literature, and to do that we have to first begin with a little bit of history. You see, the term vampire wasn't actually as prolific as you may imagine, and the actual origin behind its etymology is still a matter of debate. It wasn't until 1734 that the English language first saw mention of these creatures, although some French, German, Austrian and Serbian literature contained an allusion to vampires as early as 1718, which was believed to be derived from the Slavic form for vampire. However, others believe that the Slavic languages in turn borrowed that word from a pre-existing, less assuming Turkic term which means witch, Uber. And even stranger still, there are records of that term in Old Russian that dates back to the 11th century, believed to be borrowed by the Turkish term that relates to the same ancient pagan practice, upiri. However, the first ever mention of this term in recorded history was back in 1047, written in a letter to a Novgorodian prince which referred to him as Upir Lichich, which seemingly served to name him as an undead priest. Although not in direct correlation, it is thought that Upir Lichich would later literally translate to wicked vampire. Interesting, right? I mean, the ancient etymology of it, not the fact that a secret kingdom of bloodthirsty pagan priests may have existed somewhere in ancient Russia. Now, semantics aside, the exact notion of vampirism has existed in folklore for millennia, passed down through means of spiritual texts and oral tradition. Albeit much more demonic in origin, the ancient Mesopotamians, the Hebrews, ancient Greeks and Romans all had tales of creatures that we would consider to be a precursor to the modern vampire. In these many tales of ancient belief, the act of blood drinking was actually quite prolific and often attributed to demons and spirits that would eat flesh and, well, drink blood. In fact, pretty much every nation on earth has had some form of blood drinking undead revenant or demon, which in some cases even acted as a deity to several ancient belief systems. You see, it's no wonder that the very essence of the vampire has long been ingrained in our cultural psyche. However, it wasn't until the late 17th and 18th centuries where these same shared cultural fears would begin to make themselves apparent, shall we say. The very tales that form the basis of the vampire legend that would later go on to form the literature behind vampirism first entered into historical record in 1672 with the case of Yuri Grando, a peasant that had died 6 years previous but had seemingly arisen from his grave to drink the blood of local villagers in Istria, which is now modern Croatia. After the strange case of Yuri Grando, Eastern Europe saw a frenzy of these same vampire sightings, the most famous being that of Petar Blavogovic and Arnold Paul, both of which were Serbian peasants, a potential explanation for the Proto-Slavic origin of the term vampire. Now, the actual means of the sociological phenomena behind these historical events, if any, are a matter for a different video, because the point is, it injected a shared cultural belief that would quickly form the basis of one of the most important and impactful conventions in horror fiction: vampires. Because in 1748, during a time where these alleged vampire attacks were still happening across Eastern Europe, a German man named Heinrich August Ossenfelder manifested that very same zeitgeist and produced a poem simply titled Der Vampir. the Vampire. An incredibly short poem which is written from the perspective of a mysterious man presented as a jilted and aggressive seducer that lusts for a respectable and pious Christian girl who is protected by her mother. In it, the term vampire is only addressed twice, with, as in Vampires Unmortal, folk on the Theses portal, and in till I myself avenging to a vampire's health a drinking him toast impale Tokay. Although the poem itself is a direct metaphor for the desecration of religious faith, it goes on to directly describe breaking through the girl's bedroom window and sucking her blood. Where have we heard that one before, right? And in fact, the stark eroticism of Ossenfelder's poem would go on to influence many other pieces of vampire literature that followed it. Several decades later, in 1773, another German poet, a man named Gottfried August Berger, would produce a poem titled Lenore, an incredibly important landmark in literature and a vital entry into the Gothic ballads, but a poem that never exactly used the term vampire. Instead, it was responsible for creating another key theme that would later appear in vampire literature: immortality, or in this case, undeath, the ability for vampires to rise from their graves in the darkness of midnight, enter the homes of their victims or loved ones, and then carry them away into the night. After the widespread publication of Lenore, the Gothic ideal of the vampire was well and truly afoot, and the following few decades produced several similar pieces of literature such as The Bride of Corinth, Therbala the Destroyer, Percy Shelley's The Spectral Horseman, as well as Samuel Taylor Coleridge's famously unfinished ballad Christabel. However, it wasn't until the year 1819 where vampire literature really began to become solidified, when a man named John Polidori created the first prose piece of vampire fiction ever: The Vampire. It featured the iconic Lord Ruthven, the character of which was actually based upon Polidori's good friend and patient, the notorious Lord Byron. Now, whilst Byron also had a stab of his own at vampire literature, this was the first moment in literature where a fully formed vampire character would emerge, but more importantly, it served to paint Lord Ruthven as an anti-hero, seemingly down to Polidori's admiration for the whims of his friend Byron, which would form the basis of a trope rarely seen in horror or Gothic fiction, but would go on to become a key component of its themes, that of the sympathetic villain, the anti-hero. Now, how many likeable vampires can we name now in popular fiction? There's just too many of them, and all of them the heroes or heroines of their own stories, but back then, this was cutting edge stuff, or cutting teeth, I guess. The impact that Polidori's work had on vampire literature was huge, and throughout the 19th century, the masses couldn't get enough of our blood-sucking contemporaries. In fact, one of the most impactful methods of disseminating fiction in the mid-19th century were the classic Victorian-era Gothic pulp pieces, penny dreadful. Short, easily distributed pamphlets that gave rise to the essence of serialized horror, returning characters that formed their own anthologies, a visual tapestry that I'm sure we're all familiar with. Well, from 1845 to 1847, the second most popular vampire since Lord Ruthven snarled onto the scene: Varney the Vampire, a character created by James Reimer and Thomas Peckett Prest that successfully managed to encapsulate all of the same vampiric themes laid out before him, and thus gave rise to the popular depictions of the vampire: long cloaks, high collars, drinking blood, coffins. But there was another story that paved the way for vampire literature before we address the very evident elephant left in the room that we haven't yet talked about. A lesser known addition into the Gothic canon of vampirism, but one that is without a doubt even more important than Varney the Vampire. And that was with Sheridan Le Fanu's 1871 novella Carmilla. And this was the first ever depiction of a female vampire, Countess Karnstein. In many ways, Countess Karnstein paved the way for the defining moment of vampire literature, and her influence as a symbol of occultism, as well as the enigmatic, supernatural, almost deified creature that exists separate from the confines of civilization. It's one of the most important hallmarks for vampire fiction and Gothic literature as a whole, because the character of Countess Karnstein was pretty much the archetype for the most important piece of vampire literature ever created, Bram Stoker's Dracula. And without detracting from both pieces, the similarities between the two are staggeringly clear. You see, it isn't with the actual inception of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula that we need to cast our gaze towards, because it was with the impact that matters, and it goes without saying that there is no greater effort in history to depict vampires in popular fiction as influential and as definitive as Dracula. Whatever the case, at the time of its release, it struck a chord across Victorian Europe, perhaps perhaps stirring up an ancient shared cultural fear that had long lingered within us all. Vampires in literature are the amalgamation of many things, a collection of one convention here and another there, but the point of them remains the same. They are both a blessing and a curse. They're what we want to be and what we want to defeat. And Bram Stoker's Dracula was the compendium behind that very specific horror. And it's also probably a good place to end this particular episode of The Lore Explored, because vampires in modern fiction, yeah, there's a lot to sink our teeth into there. Well, there we have it, horror fans, our first entry into the brand new catalogue of a series, The Lore Explored. What did you guys think? Do you enjoy this brand new style? Do you have any suggestions on where we should steer it? Let us know your thoughts down in the comment section below, as well as any choice picks of your own. Before we depart from today's video though, it's probably apt that we take a little look at some of the things you've had to say about vampires from our most recent video. First up, Robert O says, vampires aren't scary because they're not real. Damn, Robert O, you're fearless. I mean, are you sure? That point about the Novgorodian prince was pretty damn convincing, right? Nation of ancient vampire lords in Russia. Yeah, I'd be scared. I mean, that's if this whole thing wasn't fictional, right? And then finally, Schmidtalica says, who's taking a shot with me every time Jack says the word vampire? Oh. Buddy. No. Please don't do that. I hope you're okay. I said it a lot. Anyway, on that health and safety note, unfortunately that's all we've got time for in today's video. Just stick around all the way until the end. If you were a fan of this video, or just top 5 scary videos in particular, then please be a dear and hit that thumbs up button, as well as that subscribe bell, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. As per usual, I've been your horror host Jack Finch. You've been watching top 5 scary videos. Until next time, take it easy.